I am Jim Collison, live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on September 11th, 2018. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. On this special edition of Called to Coach, we'll spend time investigating the experience, emotion, and empirical aspects of each element of Gallup's Q12 engagement instrument, and to know how to increase the power of it in our coaching. If you have questions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video window down there. Bottom left-hand corner, choose the login button, choose the guest account or any social media account there. That'll work for you. Put your name in where it says guest, hit submit, and you're in. Mike and I will be taking your questions live. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions about custom strengths coaching solutions for any size organization or just questions in general, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video and now downloadable audio. Mike, we call that podcasting. It's available for folks over on the coach's blog, just about any way known to man. If there's a way that I'm not doing it, I want to hear from you because I think I have every way to listen. It's available. It's all on our coach's blog. Go to the resources tab at coaching.gallup.com. Mike McDonald is our host today. He works as a senior workplace consultant with me here at Gallup. Mike, great to spend all day yesterday with you. It was so awesome to be at the Strengths Institute at UNL, University of Nebraska at Lincoln, hanging out with you. Just a special treat, and I get to spend another hour with you today. Welcome to Called to Coach.
I love it. Thanks, Jim. We just get to keep going and going and going. And you know what, Jim, I have to commend you. The enthusiasm that you speak to, and we call it podcasting, is so genuine and real every single time. Like it is a Christmas present that you're just opening up every morning when you make that reference. So it actually brings the rest of us along with you. So that's awesome. That's awesome.
You bet. Well, we are on Q9 today, talking a little bit about quality. This shouldn't be a question that gets me pumped up, but it does. And I don't know why. Some of it is, and we'll talk a little bit about it as we go along here. Over the last 3 years, I've been working in university settings. And this question in particular, I'll tease it a little bit. This question in particular in education, and I think in the workplace as well, but we've seen some really interesting numbers. So I'll tease that out a little bit. But before we get started, Mike, let's dig in. First, we've got some resources that we want to point to. Let's kind of set the table, and then let's dig into the question.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always working off of our own materials, right? Always integrating our thought leadership, our point of view, and making sure that we're really robust and intact around the advice that we're thinking through and providing for our clients. So we encourage you to do the same. So as we think about question number 9, we really are going to reference and bring back in our first break all the rules and position the utility of that particular resource. The code that we've referenced about the ability of 10 associates to be able to take the Q12 and to have a really nice, clean, effective report that lines up then with a strengths code that's embedded in first break all the rules. And so the ability to really help a leader think about who they are around their strengths, but how does that apply itself and produce really great high levels of engagement that go on to impact performance in all the ways that are relative and important to that particular team. We also want to bring in our I call it a companion book, but it's not really. It's another really strong contribution to the world in the thought of engagement. The book is 12, The Elements of Great Managing, has some tremendous qualitative and quantitative support for what each of the elements really does represent. So we get a very comprehensive understanding around each of those. That's our chief workplace scientist, Jim Harder, literally traveling the planet, every nook and cranny to extract and bring out the best case studies and stories for all of us to learn and grow from as we think about what engagement looks like and how it can be delivered in any setting, any circumstances when the right human beings do the right things. And in some of our recent reports, we're referencing a lot of our State of the American Workplace report, our Millennial report, and our re-engineering performance management report, and really converging and combining the best of those reports to give us a context about where the workplace is right now. How do we use these resources to make advances and gains and improvements through the power of our own coaching? So we want to be smart about the stuff that we have and how we use it. And we encourage you to really add to the value that you have with your clients as you think about all of those and put them to work.
Mike, let's dig into the question because I think it's an important one. So let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about this element particularly, and we've worked on this outline, but I think we're really advancing into it at a deeper level. Jim and I were talking about earlier how when we move past item 6, in so many cases, we actually are starting to move into some unexplored territory, quite frankly, for a lot of teams, a lot of organizations. And there is a progression, right, as we get deeper and deeper into that emotional core that's represented by those items that are kind of in that higher order thinking around engagement. So right now we're at number 9 out of 12. So we should kind of start to expect, right, that this is going to start to have some of those emotional tones to it that we're going to have to be mindful of if we're really going to lead it effectively. And that really ties in with the outline that we've been working off of this entire series, where we do want to talk about the empirical, right? What's the research tell us? But really get into the emotional. What are the stories? What's represented in this item that really spurs us on, inspires us, catches that emotional appeal for each one of us that changes our behavior. Having seen that person, having heard that story, we actually start to make different decisions. We actually behave and involve ourselves differently. And that brings us back to that first person reference that we're experiencing it, right? So as we go through this conversation, that we start to either recall situations where we've been in that situation where that engagement element either was present or absent, and what was different about those experiences and have a contrast around that. I would think, Jim, and one of the things I'd like to tie in is that we really involve ourselves in this notion about the experiential. What's the quality of our coaching? How does that play a role, and how does that play a part? So let's think very graphically about that.
So as coaches, as we think about, Mike had mentioned the question 1 through 6, and the value as a coach to really bring the smart stuff, so to speak, to an organization, I think is in those post 6 through 12. As we think about the early questions, I know it's expected of me. Materials and equipment. Those are questions necessarily that are, well, they're hardcore management, and they're at the very base of what we think about for engagement. Not always in a coaching skill set is that where you bring the most value, right, in this. So we think about 8, 9, and especially 10 next week, and we'll focus on 9 right now. This is really where I think coaches can step in and add value to an organization from advice, because it isn't intuitive, right? It's not naturally, when we think about the quality question, it's not naturally intuitive to the why on these questions. It's not naturally intuitive for them to be able to just say, "Oh, I'm going to make a change, and it's gonna affect things." I think this is really where you have to step in as a coach and help them work through. I'm not saying, by the way, I am saying 6, 7, and 8 very similar from that regard, to be able to give them great advice, to be able to give them help. Mentioned this as a teaser in the very beginning. I've been doing some work at a university here in the United States, in a class that we've been involved in, and it's a senior level computer science class. So these are computer science students, but last one, it's also a capstone course. So these students are being put together in teams, and of course, we see great value in the idea of strengths being used in team formations. In other words, strengths can then accelerate those when those teams get together. They can accelerate the productivity of those teams, just because they have a framework to use to be able to have those conversations, which accelerate the knowledge of each other. And then we in this class, we immediately administered Q12. The assessments that came back based on the teams, so these were teams of 4 or 8 in most cases. We did experiment around with some bigger teams, as many as 16. Okay. So in this setting with it, we began to kind of take a look at which questions would really matter to performance, and the performance as measured in what was the final grade that the students got at the end of the year, and were there predictive indicators through the Q12 that would tell us that. And so we did 5 semesters of this, so 5 points of data. And we began to see Q8 was really how they felt about, and it was early, right? I mean, they were only together 3 or 4 weeks. So it was even not like they'd been together for a long time, but that how they rated themselves as a team on Q8, in other words, committed to quality, really predicted how the end of the year would go. And so we saw what we saw is, in a lot of cases, it was a predictive indicator of that. Their grades would reflect. Did it mean necessarily that it was locked in stone or predestined? No, those teams had the ability to change that if they wanted to. But it did how they felt about each other. And Mike, can you hear me? Are you back in the?
Yeah, just
Good.
do a quick earbud change out.
Okay.
So
Surprisingly, I'm still talking.
you're doing great.
Communication number 4. So I was just telling the story a little bit about what we did at the University of Maryland in the work that we did, that predictive indicator of it began to how they feel about the quality work. I was talking to some students last night. The reason we don't ask the question, I'm committed to quality work, is because it would always be a 5, right?
Right.
Nobody's gonna tell on themselves. But when we gave the employees the opportunity to say, how is someone else doing? It was a more realistic number on how they felt about the quality, and we're not that far away from best friend. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a second, but the results were, it was this predictive indicator of performance, of how they would do on the backside. And so really, when we ask this question and when we coach managers on it, this is an easy one to gloss over, Mike. And what I want to say to those that are listening today is, and we say this about all of them, but this one is really important and can get you a really good pulse check on how they feel about each other. And if they don't trust each other, the work is going to be subpar. I mean, it just is. They're going to sabotage each other. The bar is going to be lower. So so I basically just kind of told that story I told you earlier about the predictive indicator. It came in at the university setting.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I think it really rings so many bells as far as what Q9 looks like when it's done well. First and foremost, you cannot get around the equity sensitivity that's represented by the item. Even when we look at the phrasing, right? My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. And so just think about when we talk about a culture of engagement and the mutual accountability that we all have to really support and uphold what that engaged culture looks like, nobody can subtract themselves from that equation. Nobody can withdraw their effort, their talent, their commitment to quality, and all of the other features that are represented in a truly engaged workplace. And so we see, I think, question number 9, Jim, and why it's such a predictive indicator for that classroom, right, is that there's a product that's at stake, and we're part of that product. Who we are, and quite frankly, as a brand, I think is represented in this item, right? That we have a value statement out there of what do we stand for. I don't think it's a mistake that question number 8, mission and purpose, is so aligned with and right next to, as neighbors to question number 9, our commitment to quality work. And the essence of this item, really, the request is to help me feel proud, right? Well, think about the things that you're actually truly and genuinely proud of. And we talk about that higher order of emotion, that higher order of engagement, and the connection between the emotion and that drive for engagement. Boy, that sense of pride is so powerful, and it has to be aligned, right? It has to be, there's an accountability around that as well. So Jim, and if most people work in teams, right? Most people have powerful partnerships. And if that mutual sense of pride isn't oriented around a collective effort that stands for something and is equally yoked, so to speak, and that we feel that, it's going to fall short. It's going to fall short. So the mindfulness and the intensity and the daily activity and accountability of it just can't be missed. So what I loved about what your story, I think, represents so well for us is when we think about our coaching, the challenge is for this item, how do you give it a physical presence? How do you give it a tangible form so that people can actually see the evidence of what quality looks like and what it stands for? And so I really do like, Jim, to your story, I really appreciate the power of how you combine question 1, knows what those expectations are, with question 9, the ability then to commit to and tangibly drive off of those expectations to deliver quality.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting as you say that. We've been talking about this all season, but Kurt would do this on the strength side, where he would put together these little packages of, or these themes, 1, 2, and 3. This creates a communications package or something like that. Mm-hmm. You have, if you go back and listen, you have kind of done that too, almost in pairs, where you put together these 2 questions and talk about how and I haven't spent a lot of time of putting 2 together and then looking at those results to see what that means from an organization. But I think that's brilliant. In the State of the American Workplace, we pulled some numbers back that to kind of give us some indication, at least in the United States, how we feel, how engaged we are. And then it relates to there's certain items it relates to. Talk a little bit about those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I want to lead in, and here's the picture of when Q9 fails, and I'll take us on into some of those stats, because I think we need that context to see I always like thinking about what's at risk, what's at stake if we don't do this well, and then back that out. So why are we underperforming? Where are we missing the mark? And usually when we fail on question number 9, Jim, there's that accountability piece. So when you talk about the connections and the tie-ins between two different items, I think that adds power to our coaching and our advice and our insight, because nothing happens in a vacuum, right? Certainly nothing important happens in a vacuum. And I think for our own coaching, when we start to get really smart about those different combinations and how we can bundle a couple of items together, particularly the second 6 with the first 6, I think we start to find levers that are more tangible and real, that we're giving people an ability to start to move on something like quality, start to move on something like mission and purpose. And so I like those combinations, and I think they're really effective ways to coach, because that can be a daunting effort for a manager or a team that you're coaching and working with. So that combination, I think, works well. When we fail on question number 9, there's an accountability piece, and that's where I think question 1 works so well with question number 9. There's a real perception versus reality, I think, environment that we need to be mindful of when we think about this item, and even managing that perception. And I think we all have a resistance or hesitation to what perception should play a role in and how much weight we should give it. But we have to account for the fact that there's a lot of transparency and a lot of great communication about what individuals are doing relative to each other within a team, what departments are doing relative to each other within a division, et cetera. And there has to be a real clear level set about who is exactly doing what or not, in a way that's real, and not allowing rumors and perception to run away. And that's, quite frankly, a compromise around this particular item. And there can be a perception about favoritism, right, around quality, that somebody doesn't have to work as hard and gets equal benefits or more benefits than somebody else. And so there's just a lot of eyes. We always have an audience and a culture and an environment. And so when that's at risk, the stats, they tell a story. They tell a really powerful story. And it starts to get into this notion of where we extend ourselves and where we withdraw. And so one of the key signature stats that really jumps out in our State of the American Workplace and our ongoing study around this particular item, it really operates around this notion about what it actually means and the difference between being assigned to a team but actually identifying with that team. And that's the tipping point. That's the conversion where in your coaching and as a team leader where you've really made it happen. And so here's what we see. Here's what the stats tell us. For perspective, about 1 in 3 employees strongly agree that their associates are committed to doing quality work. So that's pretty consistent really with our engagement measures overall. Here's where it gets really interesting in that conversion, Jim, is that when a team perceives that just one of its members is not pitching in, that 1-to-3 ratio drops to 1 in 5. So we go from 33% down to 20% if one person has a perception or reality that they're not really carrying their weight. However, we can reverse that direction if we can actually get the tipping point up to where it starts to mean something. If the team actually indicates or feels that everybody is pitching in just equally, then we can move that up to about 50% of that work team actually agreeing that their members or their associates are actually doing quality work. And so we can range. We have a tipping point. We have a spectrum here where we can operate out of a 20% level of agreement up to a 50% level of agreement, all based on what we do in that space to really drive that awareness and that transparency.
One of the things, the stats we have is there's a 29% reduction in turnover and absenteeism, right? Which is a very tangible, like, coaches, here's an opportunity when you're going into organizations. And, we always get that question of what do we measure, right? And so here's a clue in a very easy one to measure in an organization that the HR in a lot of organizations, HR is already collecting these stats. What is your turnover? How much sick time are people taking? That's a very measurable, like you can pin that down and then begin to work on this with the organization. Say, will it move the needle, right? Can we move the needle in your organization? And we know that 29% is a lot in that area. And the billions of dollars globally that we lose just in that area of turnover and absenteeism. When someone leaves an organization, it costs 1.5 times their annual salary to replace them, right? It's a very expensive proposition if you have to replace them. That's my job here at Gallup, right? Often we're replacing employees, so it's very, very expensive. And then there's that sneaky one of absenteeism, right? The sneaky one of just not showing up. And sometimes you'd think that may be a Q10, right? Best friend, but it really can be the bar is low and they don't really care. And I'm not going to show up today, and I'd just rather stay home.
Yeah.
And so that's that one. Like if you're trying to justify some things, this is the one where you can get a really, really good. Typically, we see profitability numbers change too, but this is one where you can get a really good, solid number on and begin to say, are we making it? What's turnover and how sick are people? And you can start pulling some numbers. It won't happen overnight, but it can happen pretty quickly.
And doesn't it just make sense? I think the stories behind the explanation of those numbers just make sense, right? When we're that caught up in the work that we stand for and the brand that we have as a team, gosh, I think our immune system rises up, to a different degree. And I certainly know our discretionary behavior sure shifts, that we stand for something that has an inspirational and emotional appeal to us because we want to show up the next day to be part of it all over again, right? I mean, that we get that dopamine rush out of standing for something special. And I don't think it's surprising at all. I really love that connection and that correlation to profit, right? That quality really does stand for something that has a value to a customer or a client in a way that they are willing to pay for it. It's not manipulation of money. It's that they see such an intense value of what we stand for and what we have to offer, that they gladly pay that price. And so I think there is a justification of what that should stand for and what it should represent. And so I really love the cycle, right, of purpose and profit that really operates around our delivery of quality. It's funny, one of our best writers at Gallup had this great lead in when talking about quality, and I just think it captures the range around this item so well. But isn't it, if you look across every commercial, advertisement, ad that's in print or on any form of media that's out there, tell me a company that doesn't claim that they have high quality. Tell me a company that doesn't lead with by initiating their claim around quality. And look at the range across this item, right? That every organization is making this claim, and yet only 33% of employees actually would say that their coworkers or associates or peers deliver that on a daily basis. And so I think there's a myth and a perception that really needs to be stripped away if we're really to get down to brass tacks and what we do to drive this forward.
Mike, we've got some examples, I think, out of the book when we think about, because this translates a little bit to accidents as well. Like as we think about safety in the workplace. I'm an IT guy. I spend a lot of time around computers. We don't have a lot of keyboard accidents. That's just, but in the manufacturing sector, knowing that someone on the line is committed to quality could be the difference between being safe and not being safe. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's always such a important question. You think about where manual labor is being done. Think about a hospital around this item. Think about biotech or pharma, where this item is in operation and being paid attention to, has such a huge statement, right? And I think there's two forms of what quality actually represents when we think about this item that I think are useful to have perspective on. There's the defensive side. If you think about a sports metaphor, there's playing defense around quality, which is about compliance. It's about risk management, right? And who are those people that never fail? They never have an error. Jim, we had an example from one of our own call centers where we have a lot of feedback and a lot of critique and coaching around the quality of our interviewing teams. And we had a lady who has been decades with us, but she actually had a 7-year stretch where she was evaluated on average 6 times a month. And she had a 7-year stretch where she was perfect across the board on every one of those evaluations. Now, here's what's amazing about that. And when I think about just, again, the defensive statement there, you talk about integrity and what quality stands for. We didn't have to guess what quality looked like or felt like, and we didn't have to wonder about how to do it. We had Charlene, who did it every single day, lived, breathed, and represented what perfection in that defensive quality looked like. So I love the stories, because sometimes you think like, well, isn't some imperfection inevitable? Isn't some compromise or concession inevitable just over the course of time? I'll only extend a maybe, but I bet we can do a lot better when we get the right people in front of us and let that talent and that connection to performance really tell its story around what quality looks like. And her commitment to it was just unwavering. And I can tell you that it absolutely influenced not just the people who sat around her, but in telling her story in the right way and recognizing her in the right way, it took an entire location of 250 people up to a level just based on her own individual commitment, her doing her job and doing it as perfectly as she possibly could be. So I love the defensive side and the heroes that are represented inside that. There's an offensive side to it as well as we play out that scenario. So who are the people that think into the spaces in between, not just the set standards and expectations of what quality looks like, but they almost invent an entirely new game, right? They're outside of the box. They're the ones that take a side street and then an alley to deliver a package to a customer because the main interstate was closed off. Right? The conventional way was preventing them from actually meeting that delivery. And they had an expansive awareness to then do something differently, a different route, a different connection, and add an element of creativity to actually conjure up a solution that we hadn't seen before, but all spurred on out of that commitment to quality work. And there has to be a value contribution, a value proposition around what quality looks like. And it helps us think beyond the restraints or the traditional delivery of what quality looks like. So I think there's heroes on both sides of the ball, just like there are in sports, right? Who are the people who really hold and maintain that standardization expectation around what quality looks like, but who are the people that evolve what quality and help us think what it should look like futuristically? And I think that's a really great conversational coaching thread, is that quality has to be an ongoing evolution and conversation. What quality looked like in the past probably won't represent what it does to our clients in the future. It's going to need to be something better and more. And I will tell you, in your coaching around quality, far better for you to have those proactive conversations around quality, what it should look like, and leading your clients on into what quality should look like, rather than them leading that conversation with you about what quality should look like. So it's just not one of those items that comes from behind very well, if at all, Jim. So
yeah, if at all, is that if it's bad, do you just not try? If you coming off that statement, Mike, clarify that a little bit more. I mean, if it's bad, right? If there's a quality problem in there, I think you got to address it, right?
Yeah.
But it is one that's tough to pull from behind.
Mm-hmm.
Is it impossible?
No, it's not. I think it's not. I think it can be a little bit defeating. I think there can be regret, right? I think there's lessons to be learned. But I'll tell you, the best, just as similar with any leadership around engagement, the best leaders of quality, they are constantly asking their teams, where are we at risk? I don't care if we're perfect right now. Where's our area? Where are we most thin around our delivery? Where have you sensed the most threat? And Jim, this is where I think if we want to connect to other items, opinions count and commitment to quality is such a powerful combination. And when we invite and have those really active conversations, the buy-in to that commitment to quality that's created around joining our opinions collectively around a table is so powerful. And all of a sudden, you were talking about even how we're more mindful about safety, et cetera, et cetera. Our peripheral awareness around what quality should look like and where we are incredibly strong and attacked versus where we're most thin and exposed is such an ongoing dynamic conversation that we can always stay on the heels of our feet, rather, as we attack, rather than being caught on the balls of our feet. So it's not impossible to get there, but hopefully we learn those lessons quickly and earlier rather than later, and then never repeat them again and live out there in that futuristic perspective about taking the conversation forward. And it doesn't even matter if we're a little bit, dare I say, irrational about it. But when you think about the deep emotional core to quality, maybe a healthy dose of irrationality is just okay for us to coach into.
Mike, I want to go off script a little bit and just kind of get your personal feelings. And when we're making this, because this is more than, I think this question is more than a once a year or a twice a year employee engagement survey. I think it has to bleed into every conversation, both at the quick connect or at the manager level, as well as at the team level. Can you give some advice as we're coaching into this? How do we help organizations add this to part of their daily, or may I even think hourly conversations of how do we bring these quality elements in, or how do we kind of help them think, focusing more beyond than a checklist of, did the machine get put back? Did that right? Beyond those kinds of things, how do we create a culture of quality, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, I think in creating that culture, I think we have to create some mutual awareness and I think mutual interpretation of what quality looks like and feels like at the individual level as well as the team. And the winning coaching question, right, for all 12 elements is what were you thinking of when you rated this particular item? What were the things that came to mind? What were you considering? How did you interpret and what was the lens that you were looking at this item particularly through? It's a great coaching conversation one-on-one for the coach or the team leader. But even as a team, right, when we sit around a table for a team leader or a coach to put that out in front of the team and just start asking questions that cause them to have this mutual accountability, this mutual interpretation, understanding, I would encourage a couple of really great questions to ask are, when do you feel like quality is important to our team? When do you feel like it's important to our organization? I like tapping into that. If pride, help me feel proud, is at the core of the request around this item, let's ask that individual, let's ask that team, hey, when did you have the most pride in our work? And really identifying where were those signature moments, those signature statements around our brand as a team, because we delivered at such a high level that it was something we would want to step into and repeat as often as we possibly can. I like then kind of creating, Jim, that peripheral awareness of quality, right? So that we start thinking about when did we notice somebody else on our team actually delivering those high levels of quality that caused us to change and adjust our own behavior as a result? When do you feel like your team members are committed to doing quality work? And then particularly why? I think it's always interesting. So I did the quality, I extended myself, delivered quality, but what was my why within that delivery that caused me to have that drive where I went so far above and beyond or outside the bounds to make sure that it happened? And then I think, Jim, going back to that previous theme or narrative that we had about constantly surveying the landscape of quality, just simply asking, what gets in the way? When you have a barrier that gets in the way of you delivering quality, what does that look like? How often does it happen? What's our solution to it? Do you and I have one? If we don't, let's expand our audience and let's get some collaboration going on around this. So as with most elements of engagement, there are some best practices out there. We want to make sure that the worst kept secrets in the world, that if somebody's found a workaround or a delivery that really plows through those barriers, let's make that as broadly transmitted as we possibly can. But for the specifics and details of those questions, there has to be an ongoing pulse around it. So I love the quick connect. Jim, you referenced it earlier, but I love the quick connect for that very reason, because when we give feedback and we think about what feedback does to really support and deliver quality, the frequency around feedback matters. And I love the quick connect, right? It's that seemingly water cooler conversation that has a lot of substantiated conversation within it, a lot of intentionality within it, where the manager is conveying that we're accountable, right? We're accountable for a delivery, which can be quality, but we're also available, right? Both you and I to have this conversation, and we're going to recognize where things are going well at their best, but we're also going to recognize barriers where they're not. But the real-time conversation, and if we introduce and involve quality as part of that quick connect discussion, is such a win. And I'll tell you, a lot of the best managers, what they do, they make no accent about the fact that if they're giving really positive, profound feedback, they're absolutely taking that out to the floor. They're taking that out to the person's office. And even though it's a one-on-one delivery, they are quite comfortable with the fact that maybe there's an audience of 2 or 3 people around them that are going to hear, hey, Jim just gave Mike some really good feedback about a job that he did really, really well. And guess what? I either indirectly or directly heard what that feedback sounded like. I heard what it represented. that can't help but have an influence and effect on helping me define and understand what quality looks like, who it looks like, in a way that shifts and changes my decisions and my behavior. Conversely, though, what they will do, though, right, if it's negative feedback, you're not going to deliver that on the floor in that person's office, right? There'll be a more discreet and confidential and comfortable way in place for that to be delivered. But I really like that. I love that advance of taking quality out into the field, quality to the front, and having those conversations really represent the best of what it sounds like, looks like, and feels like in its delivery.
Mike, how important, you alluded, and I'll quote you on this finding, as a team, finding solutions around it. How important is it in the quality component that we are including everybody in the solutions? In other words, it's not just, we've seen this, this was big in the 80s, bring in a bunch of consultants, have them oversee the process, have them make recommendations on changes, and then changes are implemented with very little input from the folks that are on the ground. How important is that? And really, again, thinking about managers and techniques to be able to do this, what kind of things can they do to kind of build those team sessions or gather those solutions?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, as with all of this, and again, I love the bundling approach to bundling, not bungling, but bundling approach to really combining mission and purpose and our commitment to quality. And first and foremost, we have to make sense philosophically about where we're at in terms of what the organization stands for and represents for its value statement around quality, its brand around quality. And so we have to be able to see the forest for the trees. And I think that's that necessarily translation capacity for the team leader to help draw, hey, here's what the umbrella of quality looks like for our organization. Let's bring that down to our team level understanding, interpretation, and then down into an individual level of daily delivery and performance. And so the first thing we have to do really is to pull that lens back and what is it about the culture of the organization, the claim that the organization has made about what it really stands for in terms of quality delivery? And so let's just first and foremost get that on the table so that we have made that level of connection broadly. Then let's bring it down to the team, right? And so if we do that, we have to create a level of comfort about teams and individuals within teams where we are okay and comfortable and expected to be questioning, to be confronting, and being very, very vigilant about what's right, and making sure those conversations are very active. And so that's such a challenge, and I think a separation for those managers that we're coaching is to help the managers feel comfortable with even creating that kind of positive tension around quality and challenging and really assessing where are we not perfect, where are we at risk. And if we can do that, if we can build that out where our teams in a really healthy, positive, productive way are having those conversations, then we've really created a network of quality control that it's living, breathing, and active all the time. And Jim, I think if I could just underscore something, this is why the proactivity around it matters. Those conversations are so much more effective when we're inviting them in and we are really controlling the pace and the tone and the direction proactively and futuristically around them. When we're reacting, it's painful, it's negative. We just invite all sorts of opportunity for people to start to get into some blame throwing, right? Some rationalization of the underperformance. And so it's an entirely different experience if we're out in front of that quality conversation. And then the last part of this really is as we distill or funnel or screen through and filter all of this quality expectation and attitude and approach down into the individual level, where ultimately it's helping individuals own and take responsibility for their actions, own and take responsibility for what's the highest level of quality look like relative to their role, relative to your coaching, relative to your discovery around what they stand for. And so I think it really does. I think our coaching can do such a great job as we tie strengths into the delivery of quality, because like we can have really robust conversations around how do your strengths combine, your top 5 combine relative to the expectations of that highest quality performance. How do you use your strengths in combination with each other to make no mistake about how you are connecting the dots of what quality looks like and how it happens on purpose because of those 5 strengths that you have at your disposal.
We had a team that we had brought in from university. So these were seniors. They were in a capstone. They were working on a project for us. And Intentionally or non-intentionally, we did not spend a lot of time trying to align them on the team by strengths. And so for the first fall of the project, they really struggled. And they had been assigned positions without necessarily, they had self-assigned some positions without necessarily us doing an intervention to kind of say, hey, are you in the right role based on your strengths, doing the right things? They really struggled. And we brought them in at Christmas time. In some ways, I'm kind of glad we did, because the lesson was learned. Sometimes you don't learn until you struggle a little bit. You're like, you can see how bad it is.
Yeah.
And when we realigned them, so we brought them in at Christmas time, spent a whole day with them here doing strengths discovery, and then talking about with them, like, hey, what role do you think you're best at? What role? And we've got some problems. We exposed a bunch of problems, and then we asked them the question, how do you think we solve these? And how do you think you're a part of that solution? And they reorganized that day. They reorganized the team almost completely. Man, the productivity went through the roof from them. We were getting deliverables within weeks of things they hadn't got done in a month. And it's not like we changes the expectations, but we were getting really good deliverables back from them. Laura says in the chat room, she says, I'm committed to quality work. Of course you are, but have found most others on my team are not. And it's not ever been, and this is the key phrase, and it's not ever been worth the cost for me to say something. Coaches, managers, you have to eliminate that penalty. This is the secret to this. Like, you can't get quality conversations if it's going to cost the employees more than it's worth to say them. And you have to, this is the hard part of this, is you have to remove that cost from the team, where saying it now is more valuable in other words, I get from saying instead of I pay for saying. And that's, Mike, I think that goes back to your statement. This one's a tough one to come from behind.
Yeah.
So if you just get a bunch of people together and you're just like, okay, let's expose all of our dirty laundry. Like, where do we feel like we don't have good quality? And the trust doesn't exist to be able to say it. You're not going to get, they're not going to say anything. You just can't do this. You can't just say, oh, we don't have the right computers, or we need to get better expectations. This is where this is the secret sauce of 6 through 12. It gets harder because you got to set the table first before they come to eat.
Right. Yeah, Jim, that it's funny. I was thinking about this, and again, quality just captures so much of this, but you have to have, there's a courage, an element of courage, or a factor of courage that it takes to confront quality. And that's what I do love about the advice that was given earlier when we look at our best practices about helping team members become very comfortable with confronting quality. And I think if you provoke that proactively and futuristically, that feels healthy. It feels inspirational. It's got a productive edge to it. Being comfortable with our quality is a really bad spot. We should be nervous if we are starting to settle in and not challenging ourselves around quality, having those conversations around it. And I've seen teams where they've gotten caught up in that really positive, productive cycle, and just the exercise of really examining where we're at risk. Because guess what happens? You also come across so much evidence of where you're at your best, and there's a momentum factor to it. There's a critical mass of confidence around that. So just a broad audit of who we are in an attempt to find out where we can improve is such a huge cultural shift and statement that the win is just there across the board. And it does have a sort and separate. I really love Laura's insight into this, because there's really two different factions at play here. And our data tells a really interesting story. I was really intrigued by what it revealed. But when we look at this notion of slackers versus those who just simply don't have the talent for a role, there's a real reaction here that I think we can pay attention to and coach into from that point of perspective. But when we look at our data, there's a 6-to-1 margin, a 6-to-1 ratio of people who are more upset with a colleague who has the ability but doesn't try, as opposed to a colleague who tries hard but doesn't have much ability. And so you see all of a sudden, Jim, it's not, so the delivery is compromised either way, right? The outcome is the same, but look at the feelings and the emotion. And when you talk about trust, that's part of that. Look at how we receive or perceive that situation. Much more tolerant of somebody who's really trying but doesn't have the capacity to deliver that high quality, relative to somebody who could but chooses to withdraw. And just think about, again, that ripple effect that it has on the rest of the team, and the meaningfulness about what it represents to be part of that team or discretionarily not. So there's a lot at stake around that item. Again, in that ripple effect that it really sends is a cultural citizenship, right, of what it means if we're in or out.
Mike, we've got, as we think about kind of concluding and bringing this in for landing, we've got some best practices. We've alluded to them, but I'd like to get kind of in a section here as we think through, as we're helping people. So we know this is hard. We know it's a hard thing to do. We've talked a little bit about the quick connect and some other things, but package together for me a little bit some of our manager and coaching best practices. We think about how to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of want to play off of that previous conversation about people who try hard but don't have the talent, people who have the talent but they withdraw their effort. And as a manager, what exactly can you do? As coaches, what can we do to help managers get inside both of those situations to resolve them, to take them to where they ought to be to really deliver quality? One of the things, I'll take you back to the 12 The Elements of Great Managing book. And the very first case study that we talked about was Nancy Sorrells. She was the Marriott hotel manager, and we had a great conversation, I think not so coincidentally, with her around question number one, those expectations, and how she was able to drive the success of her hotel that she was leading, just based around the clarity of just what exactly is it that I'm supposed to do it, and do I deliver that every single day perfectly with a clean level of clarity and understanding about what it looks like and represents. She actually had some references that we brought into play in our examination of question number 9. And she had a approach about her associates, and a question she would ask herself is, quite graphically, who is the worst employee at this hotel and how long have they been here? Who is the worst employee at this hotel? Fill in the blank for hotel, and how long have they been here? And when we followed up and asked her, why is that question important? Why was that examination an important one to anchor around? She said, because whoever's at the lowest sets your standard. No matter what you say to the contrary, the lowest performer around quality sets your standard. So if there's an anchoring effect culturally and from a team level of membership that's represented there. So as managers, we have to think very aggressively and very intently about that lowest performer, and not to get into metaphors around the weakest link, et cetera, et cetera. But the point being, we have to be involving ourselves in the right coaching and conversations to move a person to a place of delivery where there is an alignment, talent alignment in terms of their ability to reach that highest level of quality. Or we better be coaching up the gap. If it's a issue of effort, we've got to close that gap. And how does our coaching through the lens of engagement really help that happen? And we can do that, right? We've got a lot of ability to have those conversations through strengths, through the items of engagement. But if we get that down into questions as a habit that managers ought to be asking themselves is first and foremost, how am I selecting and recognizing those hardworking employees, those who really represent the best of quality? That should be very routine. How do I actually, as the leader of this team, define quality work? And does my team actually know, based on my own definition and my contribution of that definition of quality, do they know what my perspective and expectations are of quality, and where I've seen what I consider to be exceptional deliveries versus those that I think are just standard representations of what our team looks like and would have of each other. The second is, does my team then know? Like if we went around and on a piece of paper wrote down what we thought quality looked like and represented from the perspective of our team, how much alignment is there? You know, how much inter-rater reliability around our definition of quality is there for us to join and mutually agree? And then just auditing just how many touch points do I have around making sure that quality is a very active, alive, and ongoing conversation. If we only have event-based conversations around quality, that typically means when something's gone very, very wrong and very, very bad, and now we're reacting, now we're coming from behind and violating every single best practice that we've really discussed previously. So I think if we really get those things level set, Jim, and it really is coming back on the manager to close the gap in perception of reality around positioning people right where they actually can deliver that highest level of quality, or holding people accountable where they're not extending that effort, meeting our minimum expectations, if not exceeding them. All of that comes front and center to that manager's ability to coach to those right questions. Do we have, when we think of best practices, give us some outline for us, some best practices? Yeah, absolutely. Let's if we bring this to a wrap, if we think about this as highlight reels or touch points that you really want to bring to bear in your discussions with a team leader, or if you are a team leader. First and foremost, if we get right down to it, make sure that you've outlined the quality standards for each task or function. Just weld this item of quality with question number one of expectations. And quite frankly, Jim, I'm just going to go out on a limb. Let's just say we never separate those two, as a conversation. What if we just commit to that and just make sure that those two never go anywhere without each other? First and foremost, then we have to have a confirmation, right? It's particularly, Jim, and you talked about this early on with your example in the classroom, but in any team, new team members, when they come on board, they have to know the importance and what they're getting into in terms of our quality expectations, not just the static expectations that are written and scripted in terms of expectations, but really even how does the team actually do work? What are the stories that wrap around those standardized expectations? But confirmation around that, and not any assumptions, that they can, with graphic clarity, know exactly what that expectation is. Because that's a bad surprise to join a team, not having clear examples of what citizenship looks like and delivery quality looks like, and then find out that it was different, that it was higher. Be on the lookout, right? Watch out for those highlight reel moments where somebody just dazzled. Client testimonials, things that expanded and really lived out the best representation of our team's brand around quality, and make sure that that there's appropriate recognition around that. It's easy to recognize the people who have those tangible units of productivity and performance. That's low-hanging fruit of recognition. Quality sometimes can be a little bit trickier, and that's why we have to be so graphic and tactical around what it looks like and the definition of it, so that we can then recognize it appropriately for the people who are delivering it in that in-between space, and making sure that they're put on display for all of us to learn from and to perform as a result. That shared interpretation, shared expectations across the team. We want to move this out to where the manager isn't singularly representative and singularly contingent for quality to be driven. And so if we can create that mutually shared experience around quality through the sharing, through the team level conversations, it's a powerful way to drive that culture and expectation of quality forward. Share best practices. We should have great ongoing playbooks where we're adding revelations, we're adding new discoveries about how we've been better around our approach towards quality, and sharing that broadly across our team. And also creating, Jim, you talked about this earlier too, but where's the comfortable space? And this really comes back down to the manager level coaching, but creating ways for team members to share concerns if they are seeing a concession made on the part of another team member. And not getting into a he said, she said, but really, do we have a culture of accountability and a perspective where we just hold each other to that standard? And sometimes that takes a relationship. Sometimes that takes somebody calling me out, Jim, or calling you out, where it's like, hey, is everything okay? Because normally you're better than this. And is there a way I can help you? It just changes the whole dynamic of that conversation when we do it right. And then last but not least, lead by example, right? Managers not only have to be able to have that conversation and share what is that manager's level of interpretation and expectation of quality, but then they have to back that up, right? So how are managers actually modeling that statement of quality in a way that would affect and influence their team moving forward?
I think the tendency sometimes on quality is to bring in quality processes, not knock in some of those. I don't even mention them, but some of those quality processes out there. And we don't solve the people problem first. Right. I mean, it doesn't matter what you put in if you're coming in and we're going to adhere to these standards. Now, you can always super enforce that with, other techniques, maybe a little less engaging. But I think the smart ones are the ones who realize we have both a quality problem and a human problem in this. And if we can address the human problem, the quality will come. Actually, I think it'll come a lot easier to whatever quality standards you want those to be, for whatever reason, for whatever you're doing. But to ignore the human problem here, I think it leads to a lot harder, a lot higher turnover, a lot higher, all those things we talked about in the very first part of the program, absenteeism and safety and some of those. They don't fix those problems. And so I think as coaches, we need to kind of really think through as we're going into organizations and talking about this. We've got the ability to change the quality. We have to address the human problem.
Yeah, Jim. To me, it strikes that if we do it wrong, we're playing not to lose. If we do it right, we are aggressively playing to win. And I think that's where that human element, that additive factor of emotion and coaching and people in terms of that process and that drive towards quality matters so much. We can put protocol, policies, procedures, we could strangle, all of those particular books around what quality control and delivery looks like, and just choke them with content and not move the needle at all, right? Have it mean absolutely nothing.
Or move it at a great cost.
Right.
It'll move,
right.
but it'll move at a great cost. Right. And I never thought of this, of playing defense instead of, play offense instead of playing defense. And that defense is, let's approach this from a process standpoint and fix the processes. And I think the offense is, let's really go after the people problem. We still have to do the other stuff, but it's like adding grease to the wheel. Yeah. It just makes it go better.
Absolutely.
Just easier and go better. Mike, we have some resources that are available. Let's remind folks what's available for them if they want to dive into this deeper. We've got some dynamite training around this. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. If you all are enjoying the conversations about engagement and finding a lot of value in coaching through that lens of engagement and the connections you can make, I would just encourage you to really think about our Engagement Champions course. It's a 2-day course. We've talked about it before. We'll keep talking about it. People get inside that and they leave with just so much content, so much expertise, and it is an immersion into the field of engagement. It gets into the science, the research. You come back out with an understanding and a detail and specificity in your coaching that leads itself very directly into consulting, where you can help organizations and teams and team leaders really look at data, understand the stats, but tell stories out of that in a way that they can combine those stories and the discoveries out of those into moving performance, right? And helping them create those interpretations and what is happening now and how can they create a future of performance around that. So it takes you inside the science, the coaching aspect, the consulting aspect of engagement, and just has a robust amount of resources that are wrapped around that. So I'd encourage you to get inside that class and consider that as you add to your coaching repertoire. Another great opportunity, a flagship course for us, is Leading High-Performing Teams. That really gets inside the world and the mind of a manager and helps us as coaches think about what it's like alongside a team leader when they consider their strengths and an understanding of strengths as a leader, understanding their team through the lens of strengths, driving engagement. How do they create that culture of engagement? And ultimately, the accountability around performance and what that looks like in delivery through those 5 conversations that we've referenced so much throughout the series, and particularly in our position paper around re-engineering performance management, if you were to get inside that paper. So that Leading High-Performing Teams is a tremendous learning and coaching and consulting opportunity for you to invest in as well. And if those things don't line up, again, for your schedule, for your timing, for the clientele that you have right now, always be thinking about our engagement starter pack, which has the book First Break All the Rules. It has a Creating an Engaging Workplace for Manager packet, which gives you great insight about how you can coach, and a lot of activities and materials that you can use as you coach through into team leaders, and some really powerful engagement discussion cards that come along with it. And that's really a useful resource for you all to have, not only as you coach team leaders or teams, but really as you pass that on forward to team leaders, right? That they would use those resources as well to really create and provoke the right conversations and move engagement forward with all the right intent and opportunity they have.
Great, Mike. We'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center, GallupStrengthsCenter.com. Those last 2 resources, the engagement pack is available on the Strengths Center. So head out to GallupStrengthsCenter.com, send us your questions or comments. If you'd like to be a guest blogger, we say this all the time, but there's great opportunities. We did a clinic last night on Called the Coach out of Sydney, Australia. On first 30 minutes were covered all on Q12 and how that's implemented and used in an organization. Sometimes I really think the power of a strengths engagement is in the measurement of the engagement in the organization. If you'd like to write about that, we get a lot of strengths related material, but I'd love to see some engagement stuff come in. Send us an email. We're looking for 400 to 600 words about what you're doing, put guest blogger in the subject line, and send that to coaching@gallup.com. We'd love to get some of those examples in there if you'd like to write about that. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this program, as well as all the past ones, are available on the resources tab of our coaches blog. Go to coaching.gallup.com. Don't forget, join us in our Facebook group. The conversation continues there. We'd love to have that. Somebody asked me last week, do you have a Q12 group? And I said, it'd be attempting to start one, but engagement and strengths go so well together. We'll just do that there in the Webcast group. So you can join us there. Facebook.com/groups/called-to-coach will get you there as well. Thanks for joining us today. Back next week with the most controversial question that we have. Q10 gets a lot of run, and I can't wait to talk about it, Mike. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.